Hi, I'm Manny Herrera. Happy World Carnivorous Plant Day. And welcome to my greenhouse. So here we have a male Nepenthes. The flower is a little bit funky at the top. This is a Sibuyanensis truncata ventricosa hybrid. And the male stamens, I think these are called stamens, should have checked up on that, will produce fuzzy pollen. So you take the stamen, you take the pollen from the stamen and you rub it on what I believe is the stigma of the female flower. And this is a female Nepenthes flower. This is a ventricosa by Rafflesiana. So we're gonna have a pretty complex hybrid of lowland and intermediate stock. So here we have an example of a female spike that has been pollinated, and when the pollen has taken, you can see that the fruit on the spike is ripening. They almost look like bananas. And in a few weeks or so, it depends, all of them are different, these will turn brown, and as they age, they will open on their own and they will reveal the very thin filament-like seed on the inside that is usually carried by the wind and drop down to the soil or surface of wherever they're going to sprout. So here is a seed pod, a Nepenthes seed pod, and this is Nepenthes seed. You can see it's very thin, very light. And then after sowing the seed on the surface of the soil, here we have, this is just peat moss. It's got some moss that's growing on top of it, but these were sown just on peat moss with a little bit of perlite. After a few months, you'll have tiny Nepenthes seedlings, and these little babies are a couple months old. And then after a year or so, again, depending on the plant, all of them grow at different rates depending on the parentage and the conditions. After a year, you might have something like this. This is a Rafflesiana by Globosa. Globosa is a strong breeder, so everything almost looks pure Globosa when you cross it with it. So often when breeding Nepenthes, you want to look for different characteristics or traits. For example, lately I've been breeding a lot of different Ampullaria species, Nepenthes Ampullaria species together. Here we see one that is very dark and red, has very desirable traits as far as color. And here we have another one that is very desired in breeding. This is the famous Black Miracle. And you can see how dark the pictures are. And this one is also known for some of the, see if we have, I don't know where the leaves are, some of the shading on the leaves, the dark spotting, or as some call it, black variegation. And you have some that are just all green. I personally like to breed the colorful ones onto each other to see how darker you can get them or what different color patterns you can get. And then you have some Ampullaria that are green with the red lip, and these have been given the name Hot Lips. And here we have a speckled Ampullaria. And this one was produced by breeding a Black Miracle and a red Ampullaria, but you never know what you're going to get. This is the example of one. Nepenthes Ampullaria is a lowland species, and lowland species generally prefer a wetter mix. You can see I'm using mostly sphagnum. Underneath the sphagnum is just peat moss with maybe some sponge rock. This is a mix that's meant to hold a lot of moisture because these guys like it wetter. Of course, the mix you would use would depend on your growing conditions. These are growing in a shade house underneath plastic, so they do not get rained on. The only water they get is hand watering, so I want them to be able to hold as much water as possible to limit the amount of waterings I have to do. If you were growing them somewhere where they were going to be exposed to more rain, more frequent rain, you'd maybe want to go with a lighter mix to prevent rot. The most popular and well-known lowland Nepenthes species is Nepenthes bicalcarata, and it is known for the fangs. It is the lowland counterpart to the toothy Highlanders that people go crazy over. And there is also a lot of variety in the bicalcarata species. They all have fangs, but they have different color varieties. Here we see two that are kind of orange. Here's one that's a little bit darker. And there is, let's see, we have some reddish. This one is getting a little darker, but all with the characteristic fangs. And bicalcarata flowers are also unique because they put them out in kind of a spiral pattern. They're not, the stamens are not individually produced. They come out like in sets of threes. This was a male that's already been dried up and was used for breeding. Some of the pictures are like in there. Here's a more typical bical. It's maybe a little bit of an orange flush. They can be green to dark red.
What's the soil recipe? Same?
Same. You can see here, this one is growing in almost pure sphagnum. So I'll always go with either pure sphagnum or pure peat, maybe with a little sponge rock thrown in.
How long does it take them to get that big?
Bicals can be, or bicalcarata can be a somewhat slow grower, depending again on your conditions, but they can take maybe this is maybe a 5-year-old plant. This one might be, this one's actually a lot older. This is probably a 20-year-old plant. So the important thing to remember about receiving any imported Nepenthes, especially if they're being imported from overseas, where they've been growing in extremely ideal conditions or in extreme greenhouse conditions, extremely ideal greenhouse conditions, is to slowly acclimate them to your conditions. Again, this depends on where you're growing them, but you want to pot them up in whatever soil you're using and then put them in either a container or a setup where you can guarantee close to 100% humidity, and then little by little remove them from that setup or container, thereby acclimating them to your surrounding ambient conditions. And almost all Nepenthes prefer a semi-shaded or indirect light setup, so I grow them under 50% shade plastic. It doesn't feel very bright in here, but the UV rays are getting through, and the plants, you can see, are getting a healthy amount of light because of the leaf color. If a plant's not getting enough light, the leaves are going to be very, very green and spindly. If they're getting too much light, they're going to take a sunburnt look where they might be too yellow and splotchy. Now, some Nepenthes will always have splotches. This is an old leaf that's on its way out. This one is kind of old, but lowland Nepenthes tend to have splotchy leaves. I don't know the exact scientific reason for that, but they're different. I've read different explanations as to why they have splotches, but I find that this doesn't affect the health of the plant. You can see this. This is an old leaf. Where is the picture? I thought I had a picture. So you can see this leaf is pretty splotchy, but still has a very healthy picture on the end. This one is a hybrid produced by Exotica Plants. This is Nepenthes trubiana, which is a very rare lowlander. Rarely seen in cultivation and in the wild. Crossed with Nepenthes bicalcarata, and you can see the big colorful picture it produces. And we can show you the both parents. So we already looked at the Nepenthes bicalcarata, and if you come back here, we have the other one. Let's see. It's producing a big picture, but it's in it. Here's Nepenthes, well, this is Nepenthes trubiana. This is Nepenthes globosa. It recently underwent, one of them underwent a new name change, Nepenthes orbiculata. I can't say that I know which one is which, but these Nepenthes globosas were produced by crossing my female Nepenthes globosa clom, which is Thai for squat fat, with Sunbelt Exotics Nepenthes globosa B11, which is a grade A. And grade A in the globosa world means a very rounded squat pitcher with no midrib. So you can see the offspring are pretty attractive and created that desired trait, which is a fat squat pitcher. And there was a lot of variety amongst the offspring. You can see different ones here, but generally they all lack a midrib. They're very squat. These are the lower pitchers. Here you have some different shaped ones, more funnel. Nepenthes globosa by Ampullaria Black Miracle, which we looked at a little while ago. So here you have a cross of two species, and these are very desired due to their very dark coloring and their squatness. Based on their native habitats, it would be between 85 and 100. However, I've seen them grown in greenhouses where they're kept from the low 60s to the 70s, and they do really, really well. Some of the largest Ampullaria pitchers I've seen in cultivation came from a greenhouse where they were kept at what could probably be considered intermediate temperatures. But that shows you that these plants are a lot more tolerant of certain growth conditions that are not really known or reported. They tend to get they tend to be pigeonholed into certain requirements, but they can take a lot more. For example, quite a few Nepenthes can grow in full sun, full blazing sun, and I have grown many right next to Sarracenia in full sun, and some I even sit in trays of water, which if you read any Nepenthe, any book on how to grow carnivorous plants, says it's a big no-no, but some of them do enjoy the extra water and extra sun. I let them dry out, mostly because I don't get a chance to come in here and water them as often as they need, but I like to let them dry out, and this is true of almost every carnivorous plant I grow. I let them dry out a little bit before I water them again, mostly to prevent rot. When you live in the southeast, rot is always a persistent threat, and you want to minimize the chances of rot. You can see some of these ampullarias are actually getting pretty dry, so I do let them dry up quite a bit. I've never seen them in their native habitat, but the photographs I've seen and the reports I've read say that they are very much swamp growing plants, just like Nepenthes bicalcarata and Nepenthes mirabilis. Here's a mirabilis. No good pictures on it, but you can see I set it in a little tub, and I let this thing fill with water when I water it, and that's what keeps it happiest. This is one of my hybrids. This is Nepenthes globosa by Nepenthes globosa by Hookeriana. And these are probably my favorite because of the variety. They don't get a lot of credit for the variety in this species. Here's an upper pitcher, and you can hear some upper pitchers of a winged one. You don't see the wings much on the upper traps. Let's see if we have. Here's another example of different color form. If you cross a Rafflesiana with a Globosa, you're gonna, I'd say 70% of them are gonna look more like Globosa, and the other 30 you might get some Rafflesiana color with Globosa shape. This is one of my hybrids. This is a Globosa Clom by Globosa by Rafflesiana.
How about these guys?
Same cross, different clone. And these actually got a lot of the good Raff color, which is surprising considering they're 2/3 Globosa. This is a lowland species, Nepenthes longifolia, and this particular variety is all red. The pitchers and all the leaves are red. And going along with particular clones of species, this is Nepenthes mirabilis, which is a fairly common species, but most mirabilises produce regular green pitchers. This one, here you can see some regular mirabilis. This is a Thai species. Regular green pitchers. This Chinese variety produces nice pink traps, and they tend to be a bit bigger. Trait that is usually desired by growers is variegation. Here we see a variegated lowland hybrid. This is a hybrid of Ampullaria and Rafflesiana, and I believe mirabilis is in here, and you can see the variegation on the leaf. We have a few different variegated ones, but this is probably the most showy one at the moment. This is Nepenthes diariana. This is a upper intermediate type trap. This is a Victorian hybrid, meaning these hybrids, Victorian hybrids, were produced in England in the Victorian era. This for a long time was considered the largest pitcher producing man-made hybrid. This particular trap is not an example of how big they can get. They can get much, much bigger. Here is a variegated lowland species, Nepenthes gracilis. Gracilis pitchers tend to be small, but there's a lot of variety in the gracilis species. This one is variegated. You can see the unique pattern on the leaf. This is Nepenthes prevellii, which is a very rare species from the Seychelles, and it's known for the unique shape of the pitchers, and also it does kind of a circular. It produces kind of a circular pattern where the leaves encircle the, the pitchers encircle the plant. This is Nepenthes maxima, a very popular, fairly common species with, again, a lot of variety. This particular one is Nepenthes maxima pyrenensis. It is considered a lowland form of maxima, and it is a very colorful one. Pitchers actually will get fairly large, larger than this, and it is probably true to its identification because it is the only maxima that I can really grow in Florida without any difficulty. This is a hybrid that I made. This is from a couple years ago, so this is about a 2-year-old plant. And it is Globosa by Ampullaria Black Miracle by Globosa by Cuchingensis by Globosa by Rafflesiana. So a very lowland stock plant, but you can see some of the attractive traits of the Globosa the Globosa and the Ampullaria Black Miracle coming through. The Nepenthes thorellii complex, for lack of a better term, was a very confusing one for a while, because there's a lot of different species from Indochina. This one was grown as seed, labeled Campodiana, and the resulting offspring shows a lot of variety. You have some pink ones, you have some fat all green ones, and you have some that are very, very dark. Let's see here. Or not very, very dark, but much darker. So you can see that there's a lot of different variety from the Indochina area. There's one here from Saigon. And this one was grown from seed as well. Another species that spans the spectrum as far as altitude is Nepenthes alata from the Philippines. They grow from sea level all the way to more montane habitats. This is a red lowland form. This is a clone from Exotica Plants in Australia. And here is another alata. You can see that these are all green. And this is another picture from the same plant showing more speckling, almost like a two-face effect there. This particular one is from the island of Luzon in the Philippines. This is Nepenthes veitchii, a species again with a lot of different growing conditions in its native habitat. It can be found at montane habitats and down to more lowland habitats. Here we have a lowland one. The lowland ones tend to produce longer leaves, and the pictures tend to be a little bit more golden green and long. This is Nepenthes hookeriana. It is a hybrid of Nepenthes ampullaria and Nepenthes rafflesiana. This one is an all-green variety that I've taken upon myself to call green apple. The pictures will get big and fat and stay kind of green and golden. But Nepenthes hookeriana can also be all red, even purple. I've seen some near dark ones. I like this one because it's produces a lot of pictures at once, and I like the green golden look. This is an example of a highland and lowland hybrid. This is Nepenthes sumatrana by Nepenthes burbigia, and it shows the attractive traits of both parents. It'll produce big, fat, tubby pictures, colorful striped peristomes, and that nice burbigia look and color pattern. The plant is pretty big, and it'll produce more than one picture at a time, unlike Nepenthes burbigia, I'm told. Thank you for touring the greenhouse with me and listening to some of my growing techniques and thoughts on the different plants. I hope you enjoyed it. Happy World Carnivorous Plant Day.
The International Carnivorous Plant Society wants you to be successful with your plants. We welcome growers just getting started all the way through professional scientists. We started an annual World Carnivorous Plant Day to celebrate these spectacular plants. Take a look around our website and you'll find historic documents about carnivorous plants, growing guides, free educational resources, and more. Have questions? Ask. We don't bite, but our plants do.